G'day everybody, how's it going this week? Well, this week we're going to talk about an interesting topic that is of very big importance to the fandom. Shiz. Shiz? We're going to talk about shiz? Well, so apparently we're going to talk about shoes, particularly an ad that came out recently. And the fandom sort of reaction to it and sort of go over certain things about the situation. Because the fandom had a very sort of mixed reaction to it. Some people thought those shoes ruled, and other people thought those shoes sucked. Okay, that meme is old, by the way. That's like 10 years old at this point. You thought you were done with it, but no, shoes. You can never be done with shoes. Shoes are always going to come back up. So what happened here? So it has to do with the shoe maker called Converse. Converse is an American shoe company that was created back when basketball was becoming a big thing. Because the funny thing about American sports is they're not actually all that old. When you consider that most American sports have been around for maybe just before the World War II era, a lot of sports became a big thing, after the Civil War, really. Most of them had. And so, sports is not really, in the grand scheme of human history, are relatively young fandoms. Obviously, the furry fandom is a lot younger than those particular fandoms, but sports in and of itself is not really all that old either. A lot of people are like, well, we have traditions, and it's like, well, yeah, because you've had multiple generations, of those things. But back in the day, the people who were starting to play basketball and American football and all these others, and baseball, those sports literally had humbling starts as well. And people going, well, that's a weird thing. Well, who would ever want to do something like that? And then people came together and was like, no, this is cool. We like this thing. And then, fandom happens. So, Converse sneakers is an athletic footwear, and Nike is also athletic footwear. Nike bought Converse in 2003. So Converse had us a problem. It has a big problem. The big problem that Converse has is it's now going after the same markets that Nike's are, and Nike owns Converse. So now we have this situation where we have this historical brand of athletic shoe, that basically is eating at the same market as Nike. So somebody at a board did what I've got to consider is a good marketing strategy and go, how can we market the Converse sneaker to groups outside of the one that we're trying to reach with our Nikes? Because Nike, in the 1990s, basically won the shoe fight. And I think many people, you don't even need to be a business major or understand shoe, history to even know that. Just thinking of the past, if you grew up in the 90s, as I had, you don't even have to know any of that. All you have to know is Nike was everywhere, and as soon as Jordan, basically endorsed Nike, and Michael Jordan was tied with the shoe of Nike, it was over. The whole shoe fight was over. The shoe dropped on that shoe fight, right? Because Converse was basketball. Converse was marketed toward the basketball crowd. And here comes the one of the people considered a GOAT, a greatest of all time of the sport, going, I like my Nikes, right? And going on board with Nike shoes. So at that point, the writing was on the wall for Converse. And sure enough, in 2003, Converse reached a deal with Nike to be brought in under their company's umbrella. So with that history known, how are they going to sell Converses? How are they going to sell these old, what they call Chucks, as for short? They call them the Converse sneakers, that Lone Star symbol. How are they going to sell them? It seems like somebody in their marketing department decided to go, well, what we're going to do is we're going to go for the nerdy crowd. And in doing so, well, so that brings it back to us. So, because interestingly, one of the things that wasn't really covered in the Twitterverse is that this advertising thing that happened. Basically, there were other nerdy groups targeted as well, and it wasn't just furries. But the long of the short is that a shoe ad was released in non-American countries, Australia and Argentina, mostly Southern Hemisphere countries, of a photo shoot of furries wearing these Converse sneakers. Crash, a fursuit performer from Brazil, who is really well known for he's really well known for his Vine and I guess TikTok as well. I'm guessing he moved to TikTok. TikTok is sort of the thing that took over the Vine type style of things. He does little short clips and things like that, and performing in fursuit, very particularly popular. He showed, this new advert coming out for Converse, showing fursuiters wearing shoes, ruining the magic with their feet. Man, I mean, what kind of fursuiter would not wear their feet? Like, why would they do something like that? Usually my feet aren't on camera, so I don't have my fursuit pads on. Shh. But I'm not wearing Converse anyways. Hey, at least I'm not wearing my Converses, right? Yeah, no, see, if I were wearing an exuberant form of sports shoe, I think as a kangaroo fur, I'm kind of already spoken for. Yeah, there's apparently there's these shoes that have little pouches in them, and the idea behind the shoe is that they have these little zipper things, and you're supposed to keep your locker key and small items that you wouldn't have with your running shorts on or something. And then that guy designed that shoe, and that's called the Kangaroos. Funnily enough, they had just reached a deal with Payless. Oh no! My apologies, good sirs. Yeah, Payless went. The shoe dropped on that one too, for Payless. They're no longer a thing. Kangaroos are still a thing, and you can get them on Amazon's, I guess. I'm not sure, but I don't buy exuberant footwear anyways. Just buying a normal shoe is fine by me. I'm not one to make exuberant purchases on my feet. I mean, you got to make them in my size first, guys. These are big old roof feet. These are big. It's freaking huge. You think it's because it's close to the camera? That's not it. They're just large, okay? Most sportswears have larger sizes. I'm just giving them sass. Anyways, so basically, there was some positive feedback at first, but as with anything in the furry fandom, there's going to be people who are like, I gotta put in my 2 cents, and I don't really approve of this, and no one ran this by my committee. So we have to kind of discuss the sort of idea and the fervor behind that. I did cover most of this in a written form at flayra.com in the description below. I'll go over some of those points, but mostly this is going to cover sort of new things, such as the covering of the nerdy fandoms. As I said, I believe that Converse is trying to open up its market share towards nerdy cultures, and because LARPing was another one on that group. So the advertisement that was done here, on here and below, there's going to be a link in the description below to the full advert. The page, this actually shared advertising space with a LARPing community. And basically, LARPing is as dirty as you could freaking get. I don't know, furries are pretty close, but, so the idea is that I believe that Converse is trying to open up its demographic and be the shoe of the nerd, whereas Nike is going to maintain its position as the sports and athletically marketed shoe, which, by the way, is not, as far as marketing strategies goes, is not a bad idea. Considering that, for science, the organization, the International Anthropomorphic Research Project, when they do studies on furry fandom and fandom in general, they utilize fantasy sports groups as a control group. And the reason they use them as a control group is because basically the overlap between the anthropomorphic furry community and the sports community is actually small. There's not much overlap. Whereas, like with other fandoms, such as anime fandom or gaming fandom, there is overlap between furries and those groups. So they're not really effective as a control group. So in essence, whoever is marketing Converse and has this idea of like moving it as a nerdy style shoe, it's like make it like the shoe of the nerd, might have a good idea, and it's like I'm not gonna buy them myself because I'm too much of a nerd, and I'm like I'm not gonna let nerds are hard to sell to, unless you like make it, unless you're Apple or some technology company. Nerds are relatively hard people to sell things to. That being said, so just to put a general idea as to what what the controversy was behind this sort of ad, is that a lot of people are like, well, we shouldn't use fandom in order to try and promote corporations. And there's that idea that corporations are just using the fandom for their own means. So basically they're worried that it's sort of a viral relationship. In essence, that the corporation, utilizing this advertisement, is only utilizing their relationship with us in order to try to sell us sneakers. And to be honest, and to be quite... they kind of somewhat have a point, when the first Twitter response to this particular thing was Majira going, well, I gotta buy some Converse now, and it's like, it's like that sort of like pandering to a group in order to sell them a product, or in order to show support, and then you think that just because they shared an advertisement with they gave you the time of day and promoted and gave you the opportunity to pay to promote their product, means that you should in turn buy something from them in exchange, is sort of seen as sort of manipulative, right, to some people. But the bigger concern is like if it's a viral relationship, like they're just using us for our money to try and buy Converse sneakers, and instead of buying their product because we need a pair of sneakers and we like Converses and we like Chucks, right? I made the joke of like going Chuck is like, this is one fandom that's not going to be commercial, says Chuck, but then it's like, no, I gotta sell my Chucks. I knew that this was kind of coming even when I made that facetious joke. Because I knew that similarly, and Paradox brought this up, and it was kind of a good sort of connection, is that the GLBT community, the gay rights communities, right, the gay trans right communities, also have this sort of weary relationship with businesses, sort of coming in and promoting their lifestyle for a particular month, right? And they show sort of a wary sort of eye. It's like, well, if they're only using it to sell products, and if it and they're not really here for the long haul, and they're not going to defend us if society goes down a particular route. Yeah, and basically the warning is sort of that you have to be sort of self-dependent and be vigilant in and of yourself, and not rely on corporations to have your back because they're only trying to sell you products, which is a fair statement to make. You have to be wary of that. sometimes you have to make your own assessments as to whether or not you want to buy a product or not, and not just go for surface level, like, hey, we did an ad with furries, buy our product. It's like, well, just because you did an ad with furries doesn't mean I'm going to like your product, right? You have to be an educated consumer. But you can't disparage other people for, coming up with a decision to, buy the product, right? Just because they have the right to choose where they want to put their money as well. Interestingly enough, another thing I had noted in the article is this concept of co-creative marketing. And the reason we're talking about co-creative marketing, if you Google that, you'll find out what that means, is that it's not even like the Converse ad doesn't really read like an advertisement for Converse sneakers even. If you can see the one in the description below. If you can't really read it, I'll kind of explain. It says, "Don't be afraid of the reactions." Which to this ad, there were plenty of reactions, good sir. And luckily, the Brazilian community held their ground. So the ad talks about the Brazilian gathering called Verbolich. I can't pronounce it. Verbolich. I think it's called Verbolich. I don't know. I don't know what language. I think it's in Portuguese or Spanish. I'm not sure about Brazilian's main language. I'm ignorant Yankee man here. But it's basically a furry bowling group in Brazil. And it talks about their history. And mostly it talks about how they've grown as a community on the internet, and they've reached up to about 250 attendees. The photos for the advertisements were taken at the last one, which was this March of this year. So it took a few months for them to get the pictures together and to develop the ad and post the ad. So what you'll notice here is that none of the words in this blurb down here has the word Converse, sneaker, anything. There's no reference to it. Now, this advertisement is on Converse's website, but it's not advertising. It's not telling. It's like no one says anything about Converse sneakers. Nobody, no furry there, no furry in this advertisement is promoting Converse sneakers directly. The only thing that's promoting Converse sneakers is that this blurb about the community in Brazil is on Converse's website. This is what's called co-creative marketing. The concept is that you have two groups of people. One person wants to advertise what they're doing as a community, and the other group wants to advertise their product. So those two people collaborate together to create a sort of pseudo-advertisement. One that both promotes the channel that's promoting it and also promotes the other thing that's being tried to sell here. So, so they come to agreements and they come together and they collaborate on that. So you got to give it to the Brazilians here, the Brazilian furs, is that they literally put an advertisement for their bowling league into a format which is advertising their particular bowling league. And by the way, I think a lot of furries now are very well aware of the Brazilian bowling group than a lot of other things because of the controversy that this thing caused. In an interesting way, it has a lot more people are aware of it. And sometimes controversy can cause awareness in a positive way. You would be surprised when we talk about like controversial moments in furry fandom history. When CSI, the CSI episode, Fur and Loathing in Las Vegas, right? Very much seen as a terrible example of media, very much a poor representation of the furry fandom at whole. It's one of the first attempts of the media to do so. But interestingly enough, it's like, how did you find, when you go like, how did you find the furry fandom and whatnot? There are a few examples of people I go, oh, well, I found it and I was interested in it because I watched that CSI episode, right? that's a non-zero number of people coming into the fandom because of the CSI episode, which wasn't really a great representation of the furry fandom to begin with, but they found it because of that episode, right? And it's interesting in that means that just because something, just because a piece of media is not well received doesn't mean it doesn't draw attention. I think that the Converse thing isn't as bad. Obviously, is nowhere close to as bad as the CSI episode. But it also brings attention to their bowling league. And by the way, the Brazilian people who were involved in that photo shoot got paid for their time and for allowing them to be, have their photos taken in those Converse sneakers. So they got paid to advertise their own event via this thing. And by the way, this is not going to be the last time that this happens, because this co-creative marketing is considered sort of a future of marketing. It's not really a future of marketing. In fact, there's some semblance of it in old radio ads and more current radio ads where they have the personality on air, sell the product instead of using just the slots of pre-created advertisements. But in this modern sense where, you have pop-up blockers and all this other stuff that millennials and Gen Z, people in the tech savvy generations use to sort of block these standard pop-up windows, and basically they have television streaming services that they don't basically have advertisements on it because they pay the subscription and there's no ads. The traditional style of advertising through adverts is sort of going away. So advertisers are trying to figure out what makes this generation tick. And that style of co-creative advertising that was used in this case seems to be the one that's sort of sticking. Because it's not just going out there and selling a product and making a blurb about here's how this product can help you, this product versus this product, and things like that. Now, obviously, you have those charismatic salesman things that still sort of work, like the OxyClean guy and whatever. But more often than not, it's connecting with the user base. A lot of modern companies sort of have gone this route, like Blue Apron or Dollar Shave Club, utilizing adverts in the midst of poststamps.com or whatever. The Nostalgia Critic does it. I remember one of the first times I saw it was on Blue Apron on one of Jared Knobbenbauer's reviews. And unfortunately for Blue Apron, I'm sure they wish they could take that one back. But it's a good thing that Jared learned how to do cooking. Because, anyways, that aside. Basically, this sort of selling to the consumer using people who are promoters and things like that. I have to say this flat out here. As somebody who's presenting nonfiction and sort of analysis on things that are actually occurring, those kind of promotions I will be avoiding. I made a joke one about furry amino, which is that's a very good one. I'll put a card up here. Because furry amino was a big one about 2 years ago. Every furry YouTuber was promoting this furry amino app. And that's sort of one of these kind of co-creative marketing solutions, even within the fandom. And there's other situations where that sort of happens too. Like the Artwork Tees charity calendar. I did an article for them. But I only did an article for them because it was for that charity and not for their own personal profit. I'll try to avoid, I'll definitely avoid any sort of mixed interest sort of things like that. I personally wouldn't take an advertisement deal like Crash did. But that's the thing. My purpose on this channel is different than his purpose as a performer. His purpose as a performer doesn't necessarily morally conflict with bringing in things to advertise. Especially, I think the thing they waited here was how much will this help promote our Brazilian our Brazilian bowling community versus, how much am I getting out of this? And I think they sort of weighed that counterbalance and decided to go, with Converse. And I'm going to bring up this as my final point and sort of the biggest point. Because here's the thing. On this channel, I don't pull punches when it comes to criticizing individuals who have positions of power within the furry fandom. And over time, as this channel has grown and as Flavra's notoriety has grown within the furry fandom, I have to address the elephant in the room, and that is I myself also have responsibilities and have a certain lues of power over certain segments, right, of nonfiction coverage. And I noted in the thing that I came to a very uncomfortable conclusion, and that is the effectiveness of co-creative marketing. And the reason that co-creative marketing, I believe, and this is sort of the thing I thought of, is that it's become effective because people like this guy over here, right? Like this guy, sometimes they cover too much controversy and not enough successes of the little guy, right? And, it's one of those difficult things. It's like you have your audience, and your audience wants you to cover particular things. And you know that certain coverages will be more popularized than covering, day-to-day sort of, yay, things went well topics. People want people to talk about more difficult things and understand more difficult things. And sometimes, when people stub their toes, people have a sort of shorty about it. So, coverage of the sort of red meat of the week is sort of a big thing. And it can be difficult to draw away from when you're covering nonfiction things. The controversies of the day, it can become a big thing. So my rule of thumb is like, let it sit for a week. If I still care about it, I'll talk about it, right? If I still feel that there's something about it that should be discussed, then we'll talk about it. If I don't, then things. Obviously there's things like interpersonal issues and A versus B. Small little fighting in groups. Those things don't typically need coverage of that degree. But the long and the short is that when you don't talk about the successes of groups, such as the Brazilian furry group, such as their bowling groups, and even not even just their bowling groups, just the Brazilian community in general, like I've heard good stories about it, and it's not an easy country to hold furry stuff in, particularly nowadays where they have somebody who's like even more like they're more Trump-ish, right? They're a bit Trumpish, right? They just recently elected a new president, and he's very very hostile towards LGBT causes and things like that. And in a smaller country like Brazil, that's an even bigger deal than the United States, where we still have at least the buffer of states' rights, covering like making sure that the federal government doesn't overstep their bounds. Brazil doesn't really have something like that. So it's really important that the Brazilian community remains strong in those times, and the fact that they've continued to grow and succeed is a very much a tantamount to just how well that they got their stuff together. And quite honestly, it should have deserved coverage. And the hardest question that I had to ask myself is, well, you're covering it now, right? But yeah, because this shoe dropped here, right? With this advertisement thing that everyone's talking about. You covered it because of this, right? It shouldn't have taken that to cover that. You know what I mean? Would I have ever covered the Brazilian furry group? Should a controversy like this ever have not happened? And the hardest question you have to ask yourself that question. You have to ask yourself tough questions. You have to ask yourself as tough a questions as you ask other people, and that is the tough question, right? And the toughest reality is that I cannot answer yes to that question. I can't answer that. Yeah, I would have covered the Brazilian furry group. I would have covered that they had a 250 people at that bowling thing, right? So sometimes like you have to pull. You have to pull punches at yourself just as hard as you pull it at other people in leadership positions. And you do have to, come to understand, it's like, what do you think the media is doing wrong, and what do you think you can be doing better about it? I think one of the hardest things is like, this is not my full-time job. I have a full-time job other than this. And, I would love to have, people covering like the just the general like gatherings and things like that. But one individual fur can't be everywhere. So it requires a network of people caring about the community and promoting the community and the goodness of the community. And that will require time and effort. And I think one of the big things over the next coming year, before the end of the year, is to try to teach and promote people understanding how to, write their own sort of nonfiction, and trying to sort of on the side of, promoting good things when they happen, right? And doing it on the regular, right? Don't wait for the next controversy to happen. Promote the goodness of things. Because the criticism here about using Converse sneakers, right, to promote this furry gathering is that, they're relying on outsiders, and the outsiders are just going to exploit the furry fandom. Well, if that's the case, then we as the furry fandom need to be better at promoting ourselves and not having to rely on outsiders in order to try to stem this sort of conversation about our own gatherings. This conversation would have never happened had they not taken this action. So I can't really blame the Brazilian furries for doing what they did, quite honestly, because some people aren't doing their job as well as they could be doing. If some people were doing their jobs better, then you wouldn't have to rely on a sneaker company. From what I and the punchy thing that I said in that article is that, and by the way, Furcast sort of didn't even read it. Like they read the article, but they didn't read this part, and I felt that this was the most important part. Is that it's up to us to sort of promote ourselves as well, and not just ourselves, but other people doing good things in the community. And if we fail on doing that, then the companies are going to come in, buy our stories, and then sell it back to us. And if you don't want that to happen, the best thing you can do is to promote the goodness in the fandom. And sometimes that requires talking about the fandom and the things that you want to promote within it, and not just promoting or throwing things under the bus when they don't go the way exactly that you plan to. Because it's that attitude that led to the situation that you are decrying against in the first place. If you are against using foreign companies to promote furry fandom, then promoting your local furry groups and gatherings in such a way where you don't have to rely on foreign or on outside help to do so is going to be within your best interest. And that's a lesson here for myself and for other furries as well. So, taking that into consideration, I thank you very much for watching today. Kick that like, kick the subscribe button, kick a comment in the comment section. And I guess I should say click the bell so that you're reminded of things, because I've never said that before. And I'm like, oh yeah, that's been a thing since I started this channel. Why have I never said that? See, this is what I'm talking about. I'm not good at this promotion thing, man. I can barely promote myself. How am I supposed to promote other freaking content creators? But, feel free to you know, to you know, write up a press release at some point in time. If you're running a small furry group and you're getting a furry convention together, there's actually a new website that came out called Furry Conventions. Like, I think it's called furryconventions.com, where it shows like a list of all the different furry conventions coming up and links to them and all that stuff, and you know, things like that. You know, and it's like we're all in this together. We're all working to try to, you know, make better communities, just like all over the place in this world. It's not an easy task, and you know, hopefully we get better at it, and we won't have to rely on a sports sneaker company to do it for us. All right. So, anyways, have a good night. Have a good week, everybody, and I hope to see you again next week. Have a good one.